already. And also we have one of the registrars from Perth, Amy Calantry, who's currently at Perth Children's Hospital, talking on a case presentation, Sticks and Stones May Bend My Bones. I think the order of events will be to talk about the case first, and then we'll have a talk on retinopathy of prematurity following that. So, Amy, if you'd like to share your case, that'd be great.
Thank you. Okay. Is that the full screen?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for coming, everyone. So I'll be presenting a case. I wanted to say thank you to Professor Fred Chen for this case and his help with this. So I present a case about a 5-year-old boy who presented to the kids' hospital with poor vision in his right eye for around 1 month. He denied any trauma, pain, any other symptoms, and has a past medical history of Pierre-Robin sequence diagnosed at age 2. Of note, he had a normal hearing test at day 3 post-birth, which we'll find out why that's important later. He has no family history or no known family history and is estranged from his father. So this is just a pedigree of this case. So this is the affected male. This is his mum. This just means he was sent for, mum's sample was sent for genetic testing. So on examination in the right eye, there was a total retinal detachment with 4 quadrants of PVR, but no obvious break or retinal tear was seen. The left eye, the retina was flat and there were some round holes in the temporal periphery, and a membranous vitreous type was seen. So this isn't a photo of his eye, but this is what that membranous vitreous would look like. This is a wide field pseudocolor optos fundus image of the right eye, basically demonstrating a total retinal detachment with PVR here. And then this is an image of the left eye. It's pretty faint, but there are some round holes out here in the temporal periphery. So there was an extensive discussion about poor visual prognosis given the total retinal detachment and the likelihood of multiple operations with this kind of retinal detachment. He had a scleral buckle surgery in the right eye, and then in the left eye, because of the retinal tears, had a prophylactic cryotherapy performed and was referred for genetic testing and diagnosed with Stickler's syndrome with the COL2A1 mutation. So fast forward 14 years to his most recent review. His vision, unfortunately, in the right eye was no light perception due to his funnel detachment, but the left eye is doing well with an aided vision of 6, 7.5, and of note, quite a myopic prescription there. He had developed a wedge-shaped cataract in the left eye, but the retina was attached. Now, given he had a retinal detachment in the right eye and was diagnosed with Stickler's, there was a discussion about further top-up laser in the left eye. So there's a 70 to 80% risk of having another detachment when one eye has already had a detachment, and the cryotherapy wasn't complete. So he ended up having further vitreous-based laser. And these are the photos of that laser. So it's a central shot, and then some more peripheral shots out there. So a little bit about Stickler's syndrome. So it's a systemic connective tissue disorder characterized by defective collagen production and is usually autosomal dominant, although you can have some sporadic forms from a de novo mutation. There's 4 different types. So type 1 is due to a mutation in the COL2A1 gene, so like our patient, and that's typically characterized by a membranous vitreous and can be associated with Pierre-Robin sequence. So a small mandible, they get kind of posterior retraction of the tongue, can get upper airway obstruction and cleft palate. And these people can also have joint problems, so osteoarthritis, bendy joints, and hearing loss, which
Apa?
is what is important. And then type 2 Stickler's is due to the mutation in
Namain
POL
boleh.
gene. Sorry, does someone have a question? No. And that can be characterized by fibrillar or beaded vitreous, which I'll show a photo of. But it's less common to have systemic features with that type. Okay. And then you can have a variety of ocular findings. So the most common one that people think about is the vitreous syneresis, and you can get a perivascular kind of retinal lattice degeneration as demonstrated in this photo here. But their biggest risk is risk of retinal detachment. So up to 50% of patients with Stickler's may develop a retinal detachment. There are some other ocular findings of note. So myopia, a flat cornea, they can get open angle glaucoma and angle dysgenesis in some cases, and they can get, like our patient did, a wedge-shaped kind of cortical or nuclear cataract, which is in this photo. This is a photo of that beaded vitreous. You see these blobs. And then just briefly, there is a role in laser prophylaxis in patients with Stickler. So extended vitreous base laser, which is basically doing 360 degrees of laser going all the way to the anterior vitreous base. And the evidence does suggest that that reduces the rate of having another retinal detachment and is associated with better vision in patients with Stickler syndrome. So in this big study, that 3% of eyes that had the extended vitreous base laser developed retinal detachment compared with 73% of eyes that did not receive the laser treatment. So that's a pretty significant reduction. So in summary, key learning points from this case. So Sticklers can present without systemic features, and it can be misdiagnosed as, atraumatic detachment or Wagner syndrome. You need to do early genotyping on any patient you may suggest of having Sticklers, because that can assist with treatment decision making, and it can actually predict a risk of a retinal detachment. And early discussion of laser retinopexy, particularly extended vitreous base laser retinopexy, should be offered. And another thing, not on this slide, sorry, is just that Stickler's patients can present with early onset ocular hypertension or hyperopia as well, which is a bit out of normal. So just, basically have it in the back of your mind. And that's the end of my case. Thank you. Stop sharing.
Great, thanks, Amy. That was really interesting. Are there anyone with any questions? If you do have any, please write them in the chat box there, and we can ask the Amy. I have one question. With this child, did they have any sort of counseling when they were younger about laser therapy in terms of with other so when they were diagnosed when they were 5, is that right?
Yeah,
At the time did they have a broad-based laser therapy? It wasn't quite clear.
No, they didn't initially. So they just had cryotherapy to the areas where there was temporal holes, but not a complete extended base.
So the advice now is to do sort of 360 broad-based laser therapy in all these kids, whether or not they've had a detachment as a prophylactic thing.
Yeah, but particularly if they've had a detachment in the other eye, they should all get it. So, 1 to 2 age onwards.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. We've got one question from Emmy. The question as to why the scleral buckle was done for the right eye. You might not know.
That's a tricky question for him. But I think it's because, so firstly, I think scleral buckle has a higher success rate in these total detachments without tears, from my understanding. And if they've got really myopic eyes, they would rather do a scleral buckle. I don't actually know why you do a buckle as opposed to Vitrectomy.
Yeah, I think back, and it's also sort of 15 years ago as well. So,
Yeah.
doing things slightly different. But I mean, doing vitrectomies in young kids is often at high risk of causing further iatrogenic tears as well. And so the idea of a buckle is also to reduce tension on the vitreous base. It was probably to avoid a vitrectomy.
Is it a common case, the Stickler syndrome in Australia? Is it like a common case or uncommon?
It's relatively, I mean, it's we probably have a handful of kids at any one time in the clinic at PCH, but it's obviously not a common condition, but it's common enough that I'd see one or two a year.
So it's like a mm, not so common case there. Oh, I see. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, because I don't know. I haven't seen that. I don't know whether Dr. Dian Estu or Dr. Julie from pediatric ophthalmology.
Yeah. I don't think it's super common, but we do see them.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
it,
The other thing is sometimes they'd sort of misdiagnose as just sort of high myopia, and the other signs may not be picked up unless you're looking for them. They can be missed.
is it common in Caucasian or something like is it like a race or genetic profile, like a predilection, something like that? Or no?
I don't know about race, but definitely genetic
Mm.
mutations. So if there's a family history, yes, depending on the mutation. But in this case, actually, it's interesting because um, the mum and the sister were tested and they both just have normal variants of the gene. So it could be possible that dad had it and gave it on, but we weren't able to test dad, or it was developed de novo. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Interesting case. Thank you.
Thanks.
You have to unmute Dr. Anthony.
Oh, great. Any other questions from people? No. We have Dian Estu going to talk to us a bit on the pediatric theme on retinopathy of prematurity. If Dian's available. Yep, great.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony, for the introduction. Good evening, all. Can you see all? Can you all see my slide? Thank you. And let me start. Okay. Let me start with the ROP definition. ROP is a disease of retinal vascular and capillary perforation affecting premature infants undergoing oxygen therapy. Screening guidelines are based upon gestational age and birth weight. Although numerous factors increase both the incidence and severity of disease development. Early treatment of disease has improved visual outcomes for patients. However, early recognition through screening is critical. Here is a comparison of endoscopy image of patient with healthy retina on the left side and compared with retina in healthy patient on the right. We can see new vessels here and the tortuosity on the right side. With the increasing prevalence of premature baby survival, ROP prevalence also rises. Globally, 184,700 of 14.9 million preterm babies suffer from the various stages of ROP, of whom 20,000 were blind. As many as 20% babies with ROP require treatment. The WHO coined ROP as an essential cause of blindness, affecting both high and middle income countries. ROP incidence and severity are inversely related to gestational age or birth weight of the infant. 65% of infants with birth weight less than 1,250 grams will develop ROP. The diagram on the right shows incidence of ROP based on gestational age in Indonesian hospital in 2016 until 17. ROP prevalence is the highest in premature babies less than 28 weeks old. In one hospital, the incidence is more than 20%. In one multicenter study in Indonesia, incidence of ROP was 18%, while in RSCM, the incidence was 24.3% in 2023, showing a decline from 2020. This is an achievement brought by the advancement of prenatal care in our perinatology unit. The risk factors of ROP include sepsis, hyperbilirubinemia, congenital heart disease, or history of respiratory disease. Hence, also the use of prolonged oxygen therapy, twins, and history of prematurity also poses higher risk. This diagram illustrates the pathophysiology, progression, and treatment timeline of ROP. In phase 1, here, this is phase 1, decreased oxygen and vascular endothelial growth factor or VEGF levels cause cessation of vessel growth. This is followed by phase 2, where hypoxia triggers increased VEGF levels, promoting abnormal neovascularization. ROP progresses through stages from stage 0, normal vessel growth, to stage 3, where we find extraretinal fibrovascular proliferation. If untreated, this can lead to stage 4, partial retinal detachment, and stage 5, total retinal detachment, known as tractional events or episodes. Okay, how to diagnose ROP? We use the ICROP3 definition to diagnose the ROP condition. Okay, according to the ICROP3, this aspect should be noted: zone plus disease, stage, extent, and AROP or aggressive ROP if present. So ROP is defined by location, zone, extent, clock hour, severity, stage, and vascular characteristics in the posterior pole, normal or P plus or plus. This aspect should be noted when making a diagnosis. We revert to ICROP3 for making a diagnosis of ROP. You all can download the ICROP freely in the website. Okay, we can start with the zone. First, we determine the zone. Location of vascularization provides an indication of infant maturity and risk of ROP developing. The developing vasculature is lobular and closer to the optic disc nasally than temporally. The concentric retinal zone are centered on the disc and extend to the ora serrata. This zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3, and until the ora serrata. The location of the most posterior retinal vascularization or ROP lesion denotes the zone for the eye. The most posterior lesion, zone 1, is defined by a circle with radius twice the estimated distance from the optic disc center to the foveal center. Okay. And zone 2 is a ring-shaped region extending nasally from the outer limit of zone 1 to the nasal oral strata with a similar distance temporally, superiorly, and inferiorly. The ICROP committee define a region of 2 disc diameters peripheral to the zone 1 border as posterior zone 2 to indicate potentially more worrisome disease than ROP in the more peripheral zone 2. Okay, now the second plus and pre-plus disease. Plus disease is the appearance of dilatation and tortuosity of retinal vessels, while pre-plus disease is abnormal vascular dilatation, tortuosity, insufficiency for plus disease, or both. This is a fundoscopy image of various pre-plus disease. This is the A is mild pre-plus disease with more arterial tortuosity and venous dilatation than normal, and the B pre-plus disease with notable arterial tortuosity but minimal venous dilatation. You can see here. I'm sorry if the picture is quite small in the zoom. And C, pre-plus disease with moderate arterial tortuosity and venous dilatation, but considered to be insufficient for plus disease. And D, plus disease with notable venous dilation and arterial tortuosity. Note that plus disease is out of proportion to visible peripheral findings, suggestive of flat neovascularization. E, severe plus disease, not presence of ill-defined posterior flat stage 3, which combined with severe plus disease is typical of aggressive retinopathy of prematurity. Okay, for the third stage of acute disease, stages 1 until 3, stages of in ROP can be differentiated through its various findings. In stage 1, we can see demarcation line, while in stage 2, ridges are evident, and in stage 3, we have extraretinal neovascular proliferation. And stage 4, partial retinal detachment is seen. In 4A, it is usually involves extrafoveal, and while 4B reaches the fovea. And finally, in stage 5, we see total retinal detachment. When no ROP lesion is present, we use the term incomplete vascularization, accompanied by the zone of vascularization. For example, incomplete vascularization into zone 2. It is not suggested to use the term no ROP or immature retina. If more than one ROP stage is present in the same eye, the eye is classified by the most severe stages. This is our wide angle fundus photographs demonstrating examples of plus disease and pre-plus disease, not varying levels of vascular abnormality, which are assessed in the central retina within the region of zone 1. Picture A said that mild pre-plus disease, and B pre-plus disease, C pre-plus disease, D plus severe plus disease, and F severe plus disease, just like I told you before. Okay, this is another stage about the aggressive ROP or APROP, or now we can say that is AROP, is a severe form of ROP that rapidly causes total retinal detachment without going through the normal stages of ROP. Image in the right is this is the image on the right side. It is an example of the aggressive ROP. So this is about the regression, the activation, and long-term sequelae of the ROP. Regression, disease, involution, and resolution can be complete or incomplete. And reactivation is recurrence of acute phase features. Regression and reactivation should not be regarded as either the reverse or the repetition of acute ROP. Patients with a history of premature birth, even without a history of ROP, exhibit a spectrum of ocular abnormalities that may lead to permanent sequelae, such as retractional, rhegmatogenous, or rarely exudative retinal detachment, retinosis, persistent avascular retina, and macular anomalies. Here are pictures of ultraviolet fluorescent angiogram FA in various patients. In picture A, this one, we can see combined sectional and exudative retinal detachment. In untreated ROP, in B, the patient has a history of spontaneous regress ROP. However, we can see the persistent avascular retina shown by the asterisk. Here is the picture. Picture E is an OCT angiography image showing incompletely a developed foveal contour and poorly defined foveal avascular zone in type 1 ROP treated with laser therapy. This one, but this is the OCT image. Okay. Okay. What about screening for ROP? It is crucial to screen for ROP. It requires multidisciplinary approach, starting from prenatally until the follow-up period when ophthalmologists can declare that screening can be stopped. According to our Indonesian National Guideline, examination is done on all infants born 34 weeks or less or having the birth weight of 1,500 grams or less. Screening begins at 4 weeks postnatal age or corrected GA of 30 to 31 weeks. In the NICU, we use 2.5% phenylephrine hypochlorite and 1% cyclopentone or propionate for duration of the baby's pupils. The examination is done until 4 weeks postpartum in premature babies with gestational age of more than 30 weeks, while younger babies less than 30 weeks are examined 4 weeks postpartum. The examination is done minimally once before patient is discharged. This table shows recommendation for doing the examination based on the diagnosis at examination. However, if preplus is found, examination should be done earlier. When do we stop screening? In patients, post-therapy for severe ROP follow-up is done based on ocular findings. We need to evaluate further therapy for ocular findings in premature infants such as strabismus, myopia, anisometropia, and amblyopia. Patient with zone 3 mature, ROP regression without therapy, PMA 42 weeks without ROP have a follow-up examination as needed. Nowadays, we always innovate to find better cure, better diagnostic tools for ROP. One example is FFI, fundus fluorescence angiography in ROP. It is a technique to study retinal vasculature. Delayed retinal arterial perfusion and population on FFI may predict the progression of ROP. Here we can see the picture. Retinal neovascularization is a hallmark of advanced ROP. It is caused by the combination of immature or delayed retinal vascular growth and an overproduction of vascular endothelial growth factor produced by the avascular retina. The neovascularization is sometimes difficult to identify and document. Therefore, fluorescent angiography has been used to highlight with leakage and aid in characterization of the presence, location, and morphology of retinal neovascularization in ROP, as well as defining the vascular-avascular junction. Nowadays, some centers use handheld OCT angiography for non-invasive examination on the depth of capillary flow in infants without intravenous dye injection. What about treatment of ROP? According to the ETROP, or early treatment for ROP, is classified into type 1 and type 2. Patients with ROP type 1 will be observed and followed periodically, while ROP type 2 are given treatment, such as laser under ophthalmoscope, anti-VEGF injection, cryotherapy, and surgery. Okay, first line of therapy for ROP is laser indirect ophthalmoscopy, or LIO. It is considered the first line therapy. We use irradiation with argon or diode laser light on the retina. The picture of an A and B shows before and after laser ablative treatment, illustrating a circumferential peripheral retinal scarring in zone 2 and 3, areas of previous retinal avascularity. Picture C is a patient with ROP stage 3, and the result of LIO in the picture E. I think this is the mistake, is the picture D. Same with picture E, showing zone 2 ROP and the result of LIO in picture F. Okay. In ETROP trial, treatment of type 1 ROP reduced unfavorable sectoral outcomes from 15.6 to 9%, and unfavorable visual acuity outcomes from 19.8 to 14.3%. Laser photocoagulation was advantageous to cryotherapy, especially in the treatment of zone 2 disease. However, skip areas following laser can lead to reactivation of the disease. Okay, nowadays some drugs used for anti-VEGF injection are bevacizumab and ranibizumab. They are selectively suggested for ROP zone 1, zone 2 posterior aggressive ROP. These drugs as monotherapy have been proven to reduce the risk of refractive error. However, they do not reduce the risk of retinal detachment or recurrence of ROP in infants with type 1 ROP. Bevacizumab recommended dose is 0.625 milligrams. In BEAT ROP study, bevacizumab shows significant benefit over laser therapy for ROP zone 1 stage 3 plus in terms of absolute difference in the risk of recurrence. However, a lower effective dose of bevacizumab must be considered while administering to infants. Therefore, SAFAR ROP study suggested a protocol for intravitreal injection of anti-VEGF to mitigate avoidable complications. What about ranibizumab? Ranibizumab dose is given 0.2 milligram with interval of 4 weeks between 2 doses. In CARE ROP study conducted in 2016, control of ROP is achieved with a dose of 0.12 and 0.20, resulting in no need of rescue therapy. Ranibizumab success rate is 80% compared to laser therapy, 80% versus 66%. Ranibizumab has received approval from the National Food and Drug Authority BPOM Indonesia as well as FDA approval. So advantages of anti-VEGF therapy. Ada ease of performing the procedure, faster regulation of ROP, lower risk of myopia, less stress on the infants, and faster administration time. Compared to laser, anti-VEGF is also useful for treating posterior disease and IPROP. Considering the current evidence, anti-VEGF agents are superior to laser therapy for the initial treatment of type 1 ROP in zone 1 or posterior zone 2. However, there is a substantial risk of reactivation or persistent avascular retina after solo treatment with active VEGF. In many cases, may require laser therapy within the following weeks or months. Thus, vigilant follow-up examinations are mandatory for ROP after anti-VEGF injection. Surgery is usually indicated for advances ROP stage 4A, stage 4B, and stage 5, or if laser or cryotherapy fails to prevent progression of ROP and the patient develop a retinal detachment. Results are best when done before the fovea has detached. This picture on the right is fundus view of stage 4A ROP with the macular dragging. And next to it, the post-operative photo showing flat retina after scleral buckle and peripheral endolysis. In stage 5 disease of ROP, scleral buckling plays a limited role. The most common approach are lancectomy with vitrectomy or open sky vitrectomy. Surgical outcomes are considered for anatomical success, the attachment of posterior retina, and functional success. Visual acuity also. The rate of anatomical success range from 13% to 45.5%. What about experience from our hospital in Indonesia? Currently, we have program mobile for mobile screening and for mobile screening ROP in several hospitals in Jakarta for free since 2017 called Jakaropi. We collaborate with the perinatology department in integrating screening and ROP therapy. In Indonesia, there is a significant proportion of premature infants that present to tertiary hospitals with severe ROP stages, in which case it is too late to restore visual functions. Prior multi-center study by Siswanto et al. In 2021 reported overall rates of severe ROP stage or higher in Indonesia was 4%. A case series published in our hospital found that in 2000 until 2020 and 2021, a total of 19 eyes of 10 patients presented to our outpatient clinic with stage 5 ROP. Therefore, this highlights the importance of telemobile screening to ensure early detection for ROP to prevent childhood blindness. This is the challenge of ROP screening in Indonesia: lack of trained ROP ophthalmologists in rural location, limitations of medical facility accessibility due to geographic barriers, and remembering Indonesia as an archipelago. This is coverage of the Jakaropi has evolved over the last few years. First launched in 2017, we started in Cipto Mangunkusumo Hospital as an Indonesian National Referral Hospital, then expanded to Ovela Regional Government Hospital called Koja Hospital in the following year. In the following year, 2020 and 2021, we further expanded to include several private hospitals in South and Central Jakarta. It includes Pondok Indah Hospital, Brawijaya Hospital, Kamang Medical Center, YPK Mandi Hospital. Since last year, in 2023, with the addition of new ReadCam device, we further expanded our coverage to more hospitals in Jakarta, Budi Asih, Cengkareng, and Greater Jakarta area Depok, Nada Private Hospital, Bekasi, Tangerang. Of note, this hospital are government-owned hospital. So this is a picture of our Jakarta ROP team, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dan. That was really interesting. There's been a few questions from the audience. One question is from Michael. He wanted to ask, how do you differentiate between threshold ROP and type 1 pre-threshold ROP? What's the clinical significance of this distinction in initiating treatment? Which is quite a sort of fairly topical, and people get confused about how ROP is classified. Sorry, just, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Michael. Okay. If there is I mean, if you can use the fundoscopy, indirect fundoscopy, you can see that if there is fibrovascular junction on the between the vascular and avascular area, you can think or consider treatment for the patients. I think this is the clinical significance when you see the ROP with indirect ophthalmoscopy. Sometimes with the mobile retinal camera, it is quite difficult to see the 3D the dimensions of the rise of the fibrovascular junction between the vascular and avascular retina. I hope it can answer Dr. Michael questions.
I think it also relates to the two different studies. So I think pre-threshold and threshold was a sort of coined in the cryo-ROP studies, which looked at defining threshold disease as much higher than what the early treatment of ROP study, which you've discussed as well. So which looked at type 1 and type 2 disease. So I think pre-threshold had zone sort of stage 3 disease and 3 contiguous or 5 contiguous or 8 cumulative clock hours. So it was a higher threshold for treatment compared to type 1 disease, which is a much lower sort of criteria for treatment as well. So I think that's the early treatment of ROP sort of coined the type 1, type 2 phrase, which is different to the threshold disease, which is where I think a lot of students get confused by the two. The type 1's a newer sort of way of which we sort of think about ROP. So it's a good sort of question to clarify. Ash Alsha has asked the question, when should a patient who's received anti-VEGF treatment be re-examined, and what signs indicate disease reactivation?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Alsha. I think I have never read before about the protocol or standard of procedure of patients after being given with anti-VEGF injection when they should be re-examined. But in our hospital, we can start to check after 1 week after the therapy, after the injection, and we have to see this is regress or this is reactivate or this is progress into worst stages, and we can see if this is the reactivation. We can see that maybe the neovascularization with getting higher or getting more dense on the retina. So I think we should think that this is not working or not effective for the patients after being given anti-VEGF injection. I think that's I hope.
When would you stop examining children who've had anti-VEGF to be happy that they're not going to reactivate? Do you have an age in mind, or do you keep monitoring them?
If in my experience, if after being treatment with the anti-VEGF injection, sometimes they need a laser treatment for the zone 3 area. So sometimes I have to add the laser therapy for the patients, and after the laser therapy, we should not after the therapy itself we can stop, but I think we have to monitor the patients until they reach the school of age. So until we can see the sequelae of the treatment that we given to the patients for the babies. I think we can see maybe we can see the sign of strabismus or myopia or amblyopia and also about the fundus retina after the anti-VEGF injection and itself, and also with the additional of laser treatment.
Great, thank you. We've got Putra who's asked, at what gestational age and birth weight should routine ROP screening begin? And how do screening protocols differ between high and low resource settings?
Okay, our country, based on the national ROP guidelines, when we have to start the ROP screening, we should start at the 35 gestational age, and 100 and less one the baby, if the baby less have the birth weight less than 1,500 grams for the babies for to have to start to be screened. And unfortunately, we don't have the protocols for the to differentiate between the high and low resources settings. Maybe I think in Indonesia we already know that. I think more than 80% of the Indonesia area don't have retinal mobile camera. So, but I think the doctors on from the pediatric ophthalmology or the retinal, or maybe the general ophthalmologist who has been trained with the ROP screening can use the indirect fundoscopy on their hospital to do the ROP screening. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And I know from our criteria a little bit lower in that we don't recommend screening before the age of around about, I think, less than 31 weeks and 1,250 grams. So we've sort of made this criteria a little bit more stringent, which I guess is a reflection of the resources here. And I think the screening criteria are quite different and very localized, I think, depending on the local sort of patient population as well.
And also depending on the survival rate of the babies, maybe in
Yes.
Indonesia, yeah, the lower of the gestational age, and maybe they do not already.
Live. Yeah. Yeah. So we have Hindan who's asked two questions. First one is, despite the reported superiority of anti-VEGF therapy over laser, in which clinical scenarios is laser still preferred over anti-VEGF treatment? So that's number one. And yeah, we'll go number one first, I think. Enough to talk about there.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hindan, for the questions. I think nowadays that anti-VEGF injection therapy is more popular because the easy way to do, but because of the long-term sequelae of the anti-VEGF therapy for the baby. So I think in my hospital it is restricted to the aggressive ROP, AROP, that with no proof of dilatation after given by the eye drops. So if it is not dilated by the eye drops, we can also start with the laser. But if it is not dilated with the eye drop, we use the anti-VEGF first, and after that we can monitoring the effect of the anti-VEGF, and we can continue with the laser if there is some persistent area that still avascular.
Mhm.
I think that's all for the number one, and I think for number two, what follow-up schedule is recommended for infants with regress ROP, and what long-term visual complications should consider. I think I have mentioned before that even though the ROP is regressed, but the status of the child is still premature babies or the history of premature, and we can see that the long-term visual complications that we have to note is the refractive error, and also strabismus, and also amblyopia, and yeah, I think that's all that then that I can see from the more patients that we follow up until now.
Yeah, good. Paramita has asked, how can you tell, how do you know if a patient has aggressive type of ROP? I guess what are the clinical features that would point you in that direction?
Yeah, I think we can see all family from the Google, from the literature, or from slide that if we can see the dilatation of the the vessels, the dilatation from the for the optic cup or for the optic disc from the optic disc and spreading around the four quadrants from the into the whole retina from the four quadrants, and dilatation and tortuosity and very markedly dilatation and tortuosity, we can use the terms adhesive type of ROP.
Yeah, excellent. Matilda's asked, what type of anti-VEGF agent do you prefer for ROP, and how do you determine the appropriate dose?
Okay, just like I said from the previous slide, that we used both anti-VEGF therapy. We use the bevacizumab and ranibizumab, but I think because of the national insurance limitation from our government, we use the bevacizumab for low resources patients and use the ranibizumab for the affordable patients.
Yeah.
For the anti-VEGF treatment and for the appropriate doses, just like I said from the previous slide.
Yeah. Number two, I think we've answered. An interesting question. If you have a patient who has reactivated after you've given them anti-VEGF, do you give another anti-VEGF injection or would you prefer laser?
Laser.
Yeah, it'll be the same here. And is your oxygen saturation policy in the NICU influence your incidence and severity of ROP? Have you had any changes since having any difference in oxygen protocols?
Yeah, I think it must be influence the result of ROP, but I think the neonatologist must be know about this about this more detail about compared to me.
Very diplomatic. Any other questions from anybody? I think we've got to the last of the questions. Well, so I think this brings the discussion to a close. Thank you very much for the great talk, Dian and Amy. And yeah, it's very interesting to see the differences between the way ROP's sort of managed and the similarities as well. It sounds like we're both doing similar things in our different centers. Anyone got any questions? No. Great. Thank you, everybody, and hope you have a lovely evening. And it was lovely to chair tonight's meeting.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Anthony and Dr. Amy.
Thank you.
We have
Thanks, Mona.
we have a photo.
Oh, yeah.
We have
How
a
do-
photo. Yeah, in the last. Please, Dr. Isma.
Who takes the photo? Is that me?
Thank-
Or someone else can?
No, Dr. Isma.
Okay.
From our side. Could you please on your camera?
Yes. For all participants, please kindly turn on your video. I'll take a quick picture. One, two, three. Once again, one, two, three. One more. One, two, three. Once again. Okay, that's all, Doc.
Thank you. Thank you so much for attending the session. Thank you, Dr. Anthony, for moderating this case. And thank you, Dr. Amy, for the
Thank you all for the
thank you, Dr. Dian, for a nice lecture. Thank you. We will meet you all in the next month. It will
Thank
be
you.
the Southern side for the lecture, I think.